All right. Well, I am once again joined by my friend Ivan, who goes under the alias of Ivan Mike and the code number 1968 for reasons surpassing all understanding. And he and I have been talking about talking, which anyone who watches this channel will not find funny at all. We've been talking about a subject for quite a few years now, and that subject was the caller. And if you are subscribed to Ivan, as you should be, then you've already seen Ivan's survey of the topic of the caller. This video is only tangentially about that. It's built on it. It is its foundation. If you have not yet watched it, the link will be provided in the description box below or in a card above. Now, what then is this video actually about? Ivan, what is this video actually about?
I'm glad you asked, Anthony. It's
Cheers.
about the caller and our experiences with it and all that kind of good junk.
Right.
What is the
Okay.
caller, you might ask?
What is the caller? Earlier, we were joking that the caller was a magical being that guided people through realms of imagination, but not so. The caller is what is the caller at its basic level? If we strip all the different variations and versions away that we were exposed to in the progression of early Dungeons and Dragons releases, what is the caller?
It's one player that's got the responsibility of telling the game master, this is what we're doing next.
Right. Now, I imagine that people who have never played with a large group of people or who have never played in a double blind game or don't do a lot of large scale wargaming or that they've only ever played with two or three people, that premise probably seems ridiculous.
Right.
Right. Or maybe they're imagining something like only one player has a phone
Right.
and the dungeon master or the game master or whoever is in another house and we have to communicate by phone, by phone or by chatting on the chatting through some kind of messaging service. And so everyone's talking back and forth through this one harried individual who's frantically typing away. But that's really only partially true.
No, only partially.
Right. So why was it necessary for this caller to communicate with the dungeon master?
Well, based on more of my research, like talking to a lot of people about it. And it's actually really cool that, like, since I produced that video, released the video, even though I got a lot of responses from people at Dragon's Foot, from people like Tim Kask, people that were there, like the old guard, people started playing before us about why that happened. It was really cool to see the same thing, like from the people that watched the video, and then I linked it to a bunch of Facebook groups um, that deal with those games and enthusiasts of those games, and I got tons more. I mean, probably more than the responses I got before. So why was it necessary? Um, it was essentially a mishmash of things. It was, in some cases, the groups were so large that, out of self-defense, the game master needed one person. Okay, what do you guys do next? Everybody's shouting at once. Jimmy's saying he's doing this. Harry's saying he's doing that. Susan. Okay, seriously now, what are you guys doing? There's 20 of you. Um,
Right.
you know, in other cases, it was just, that it made, the game run smoother. And so there was some kind of consensus taken. And rather than everybody saying what they were doing, there was finally one plan that came back. Okay, Fred's going to listen at the door. Susan's going to go do this. I'll check for traps.
So out of curiosity, when when these games were new and you were playing them, right? So we're talking about the early 80s, this period of time. You're young, the games are new. How many people did you usually play with in your group when you started?
Man, well, I had the experience of, like, I didn't have an older brother that played the game. I didn't know older kids that played the game any place. So literally, I had heard about the game at some point, I think at that point, like it was Dungeons and Dragons was becoming sort of popular, or was going to be in comic books. So you say, oh, you can play in the realms of imagination, or all that junk. Great
Dimension
ads.
door. Yes.
I wish I still had those. Oh, please, please, mighty hero, spare your arm. It's a mighty sword, Gryffindor, or whatever the heck it was, back in the day. So it became like, oh wow, this is a thing you can do. So I asked my parents for it, get the thing, and so did a bunch of my other friends. But literally, that was it. So that was a very circuitous way of answering your question. Say, we'd probably get a bunch of maybe 5 of us together.
Okay.
It wasn't a lot, and we're
Did
all
that number
newbies.
increase or decrease as you got older and then up to the point where you stopped playing?
I think it remains somewhat consistent. I mean, I think I may have played at some tables where there might have been like about 8. I don't think we ever got up to 10.
Right.
For the most part.
For me, we were all over the map. I've mentioned on the channel a lot of times that we were all game masters and we were all running our own worlds, and just pretty much on whim we would play with one person as the DM and the others as players. And so it could be 1-to-1 play, or it could be groups of 4, or it might be groups of 7 or 8 or 9, and different ages too. And so all the way from when I started in junior high up through the end of high school, the number was accordioning, ballooning up and down between the small, more intimate 2 or 3 people stuff and the 7, 8, 9 groups. And so there were times we played with a caller and times we played without. And, yeah. So did you play with a caller?
Very rarely, and it was usually really informal. But for the most part, we really didn't. And a lot of that, I think, was based on uh, either we forgot, or more to the point, the readings that we did, because most of us kind of got some version of basic, and then quickly graduated to advanced, and so we read different things in those books. And at least I did. Like, oh man, I don't want to do that. So screw that. Nobody's gonna tell me, that what my guy does.
Right.
But sometimes we'd use a caller, and it kind of just happened organically, that one player just started making a lot of the declarations, and they became the de facto party leader. And a lot of times everybody else was like, yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Yeah, we go left, or we do this, or we,
Right.
and we
Just
all
like
kind
in
of
real
moved
life.
along, yeah, exactly. We moved along with the unit. All right, sounds like a good idea.
All right. We do that. What about standard operating procedures? Did you or your group or groups evolve a set of standard operating procedures for what we do when we encounter, a locked door or an unlocked door or that kind of stuff?
Yeah, pretty quickly. And that is a game where you're role playing skill sets very often. You're not just role playing a character, you're role playing a function in a group. And so it's very much like the A team or something like that. So it became very obvious. Okay, well, this guy, he has this skill set, so he's going to listen at the door. He's going to check for traps and make sure that everything's okay. There are people that we're just going to protect. They're going to hang back unless they need to do a magic thing. Maybe they'll hold the torch, something like that. There are people that are going to, take up guard positions, and fairly frequently, the groups kind of evolved into that. And I don't think we ever discussed it and said, this is our standard operating procedure. We all kind of knew after a while what we were going to do in a given situation. People might say it, but you kind of already knew what he was going to
do. We definitely had habits of play, and I played with groups that definitely had established procedures for common situations. And they even had plan A and plan B kind of formulations, just to make the processing of turns faster. Like, it didn't serve any other function. It wasn't really in character communication.
Right.
That kind of thing. So I think that's an important detail if a group was willing to go to that kind of extent to make their play faster and minimize the impact of the common things.
Yeah, what do you think we should do this time, Fred? It looks kind of dangerous. Like, well, exactly. This guy goes first. Yeah. snakes, you go first. That's pretty basic.
Right. It's a T junction. Should we go left or should we go right?
Always
Never
go
go
left.
left. No, always
Yeah,
go left.
yeah, exactly. And to
Which is
this
it?
day, to this day, I'll play with certain groups and we'll kind of fall into those roles.
Right, right.
And I think that just kind of happens organically sometimes, but it can happen.
So I think those are important elements there. And then, like I alluded to at the beginning, the presence or lack of wargaming in the group as a related hobby,
Right.
and what kind it was. If it was one-to-one skirmish games, you're going to have to change the rules of most of those games to include a function like a collar. But if you're playing a double blind kind of setup, then either the game master is traveling back and forth between the two maps, or you're writing instructions to the game master back and forth between the two maps or three maps,
Right.
or you've got a runner, and that runner is the caller, or a version of the caller.
A version of the caller, But yeah, they're definitely the conduit of information back and forth, the conduit of consensus.
Right.
Or the person that makes the best decisions. But
Right. I'm not actually going to do anything on my map, but you just go tell the game master what I did and make it good. Yeah. I don't think that was it.
No, probably not. Probably not. What about you? What were your experiences with using the caller as far as like how frequently did you do it, or did you do it intentionally? Like, okay, we're going to have a caller now.
When I was being introduced to play, as I've mentioned on the channel before, my second session, I ran. I was handed basic D&D at the time, right, and told to read it, and when I was ready to run the game. So the caller was a part of it, but it didn't seem to make much point because that first game that I ran was a one-on-one game. But there's a caveat there because it was one dungeon master and one player character, but there was henchmen, hirelings, retainers.
Right. Yeah.
There was a retinue for this one player. And as the groups got bigger with people,
right.
the collection of non-player characters orbiting the player characters got pretty large and unwieldy. And so even if we weren't playing with a caller, we were often playing with someone who was managing resources.
Right.
If that makes sense. And then this later evolved into troop play, right? As we started to give these minion level characters, or these lesser characters, some kind of personality in case of an inevitable death. They could be brought into the party without that kind of poof, and there's a player character feeling, right?
Right.
There was a more natural development to the characters many of the characters had names. A lot of them had personalities and that sort of stuff already established by play. And so the caller became a necessity in the large groups, especially with younger players or novice players. And so you could have that interaction with a more experienced player. It didn't necessarily have to be older, but a more experienced player saying, what do you want to do? And they're saying, well, I want to do this. And they would guide them through how the person's character actually worked, or what the spells meant and that sort of stuff, without that always having to be the DM. And then again, like you said, consensus could be reached. But in the smaller groups, this is never really necessary. It's not that the caller was absent, it's just the need for the caller wasn't present.
Right. That makes sense. And it's kind of interesting too that the taking some of the load off the game master is part of that dynamic. It was really, really interesting. I forget the guy's name that talked about this idea that he thought that games with a caller ended up being more player directed because you've got this person that's saying, "Okay, everybody, what do we do?" Or your character can do this, and then they finally say, "Okay, well, we go in this direction," as opposed to game master, getting a bunch of sort of things like, "Okay, well, you guys continue down this corridor," and then move, the caller kind of moves the action along instead of the game master moving the action along, and a bunch of
Right.
other um, not functions of the game master, but things that the person that is in the game master seat might take over or might feel like they need to take over because nothing's happening or the players don't understand.
Right. Their insecurity might be bubbling up. It's like, well, we've been sitting here and they're just arguing back and forth, so I must have done something wrong or whatever, and they start to push. Where the
As
caller's
you
not going to feel
continue
that
forth,
at all.
yeah. Right, exactly.
One thing I find particularly interesting about that is that communication could be entirely out of character, or it could be entirely in character. And
Right.
growing up, we took it the in character route, which was different from how the guy who introduced me's brothers, older brothers, played. They definitely handled all of this stuff, one step removed from their characters.
As far
But
as the
for us, it
debate
just seemed
decision making
natural to.
process. Right.
Pardon?
As far as the debate and the decision making process before you report your final answer to the game master, yeah.
Right. So they would discuss things out of character the way they saw them. This wasn't a conversation between the fighter and the thief or the fighter and the magic user. It wasn't on that layer of play. It was these players managing the resources of their characters to see what it was that they did or didn't want to do. But for us, you had that same conversation. It was just from the perspective of the people who are actually standing in the dungeon corridor or out in the wilderness or whatever.
Yeah.
The out of character part was the caller communicating with the game master.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's funny. I just thought about like there was a game I was involved in probably in 2011 or something, a D&D derivative, it was Pathfinder. And we didn't elect so-and-so as a caller, but very often, as I recall, there would be that out of character discussion about what do we do. And then one player tended to tell the game master, all right, we're doing this. And so we didn't elect Justin caller, but he very often was the caller. Um, and in a lot of the games I play on Thursday night, very often the discussions will be sometimes they'll be out of character, a lot of times they'll be in character, and the characters will I'll watch them all debate amongst themselves in character. What do we do? We could do this, and then finally, one of the more vocal players will then say, "And now we do this." You know, so it's kind of interesting. You can see both of those things happening, and in neither case was somebody elected caller, but very often a player will tend to can take over that function and not be a dictator, but just they're the one that, okay, finally, yeah, that's what we're doing.
Right, because in your video you pointed out how the text definitely changes, and that's what we had started talking about years ago.
Five and a half. I went back. In our uproariously named private Facebook group, the RPG Techniques Consortium, we started talking about this 5.5, almost 6 years ago. And I'm watching the videos of us when we were young and vibrant. And you lived in a different town, and I was thin, and
yes, we are unscarred by tragedy.
All those kind of things. I'm like, man, we were so young and idealistic, but in a long discussion about that sort of stuff.
So the text changes
Right,
pretty
exactly.
markedly between the basics and AD&D, but it still changes between the basics, which is kind of interesting.
Right.
And you pointed out in your video the progression of like the caller is to the caller should to the caller must.
Right. Yes, interesting. You said how the language changes, and you pointed out too that Frank Messer was probably a much better technical writer and was much more precise in the words he used.
He also had
was
the third chance at
it. Third try, yeah, exactly, and really, arguably, probably maybe fifth chance at it. Yeah.
I mean the third basic, but yeah,
a third basic chance, but yeah, I mean over and over they're trying. clarifying, that, and as you'd mentioned, probably a lot of that was due to feedback, like, hey guys, this really
Right.
should be a consensus thing, or must be a consensus.
And there's
You know,
also maybe the notion that this product really is for kids.
right?
And adults speak to children differently than they do to other adults. Right.
No, exactly, exactly.
Like maybe you should take that car in for maintenance. Maybe that engine light means more than a faulty light, rather than you have to take this in.
Exactly, or you'll die. Yeah, that's true. But the language change got a lot more prescriptive and a lot more precise, and a lot, you know, it was made a lot clearer that you have to talk to everybody. You have to get to a consensus. You're not just going to be a dictator and play the game by yourself, which is a far cry from AD&D, which pretty much you watch the guy play the game by themselves, and if the other players disagree, well, this is confused and muddled, and you know what's going to happen next.
And that's really interesting because I totally agree that that's how the rules part of it, right? You as the dungeon master must
Right.
do this. That's how the rules part of it is definitely written. I'm less sure about the example of play as
Yeah.
being accurate reporting of
Right.
actual play.
Yeah,
I,
and the
I, I
prop.
see it more as like I don't want to write all this dialogue out for these people I don't know,
Right.
or I don't want the people who are actually there to contradict me. Right, so it's either a real experience recorded or it's a fake experience generated for an example. Either way, I don't want to write page after page after page after page of this. I want to be to the point.
After a short
And so,
conference, the party decides to, yeah, exactly. I get it, you know,
yeah.
but
So,
it still is, it's a technical manual to a certain extent, like all role
yeah,
playing games are, and like you're a 13-year-old kid, and you're reading this pretty literally. Oh man, oh wow,
you can,
okay,
yeah.
you know,
So it's either, I mean, it's much better than no example at all.
right,
And I guess the risk taken is that someone would read it and think, well, that doesn't sound very interesting, or whatever. You know, I've definitely read some examples of play in some games that have dampened my enthusiasm for the game. It's like there's my perception of what the game was about, and then this example of play waters it down or weakens it or redirects it in some way that I'm less interested in. I've had that experience.
right,
And but I've also really missed examples of play in some games where it's absent.
yeah,
You know,
that's true.
like with a brand new system, you're kind of looking for that example of play. It's like, how does the writer envision this flowing? I'm not 100% sure that that example is how Gygax and company envisioned the game as flowing.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Um,
I highly doubt it.
and I wonder how many people took it totally literally, like the caller makes the decisions rather than the caller reports the decisions or the caller transmits standard operating procedures in standard situations and then confers with the party
Right.
in non-standard situations. You know,
Yeah, no,
I'm just
absolutely. And
I'm not certain.
I remember being a little taken aback by that as a kid. I mean, I read Mold Bay first, which was much, much different. The example of play is much, much different. Hopefully, I'll make a video, just another read along video of that one. But
Read along with that.
the description of what the caller was supposed to do was much, much different. So I took it. I was still taken aback, but it was really funny. Like when we went back to and we decided we were going to play rules as written, and I start reading a bunch of stuff like, oh man, the caller, and I remember reading that again, and they're like, oh, I don't think I want to do that. But yeah, it definitely changed, and it probably wasn't. They probably didn't put a heck of a lot of thought, or it wasn't really representative of what they really did. You know?
I mean, the actions taken probably represented what they actually did,
Oh
but
yeah,
the interactions around those actions
exactly.
may have been fictionalized, right, based on a true story, kind of thing.
To make things smoother and to make the example go by faster. And I love that
Yeah,
example. It's great, but
Yeah.
Those things kind of
So
stick out.
what if, what if we take the AD&D version, the caller is the leader of the pack interpretation of the
Right.
AD&D caller, and we put that through the filter of, but you're going to role play this in character in game, right? So you have your group of, let's say, 7 players.
Right.
Game master would like there to be a caller to make it easier on them. So, can we have a caller? And the group agrees. And then someone in the group, even using the cask model of a rotating member of the group,
Right.
will be chosen on a given delve to be the caller. And they'll make decisions. They're the leader, but it all has to be role played. Does that feel different from out of character for you?
Yeah, a little bit. I think so. And I remember, DBJ
Yeah.
made a great video, which I think was a little bit tongue in cheek of like various role playing ideas that will never work. And one of them was leader or hero and company. And of course, I immediately called shenanigans because that can be a lot of fun. Um, and I played in games where essentially it can be a little bit like hero and company. There are stronger characters. There are characters that have the role in the imagined situation as the leader. There's a stronger personality. The other people kind of go along with them, and that's a hoot. You know, especially when it's role played.
Right.
As opposed to, well, Bobby's going to make the decisions tonight. You shut up, and like when it's your turn to cast magic missile, do it. Cast magic
No
missile.
arguments,
Magic is,
you.
okay. Um, and that's a totally different animal, because it feels a lot more like um, fiction that we're used to, you know.
Right. A lot of the fantasy that we would have read growing up, like the Belgariad, for instance.
Right.
You in a game like D&D where you're stuck in a level based hierarchy. I think there's a lot of pushback from a lot of people if we're going to have someone playing Belgarath the Sorcerer, then it's going to be a very high
Right.
level character, and then somebody's stuck playing Gary, and it's like, I don't know anything. Where are we going here, Paul?
Yeah. Oh God.
It's like, sure, he gets to wind up being mega powerful
Right.
at the end, but that's a
Yeah.
long wait. That's 5 books later.
And I'll be out of college by then, playing every week by the time I'm in.
So yeah, if we're conceiving of it that way, that does seem like a bum steer. Like no
Yeah,
thanks.
right.
But if the point of play was the experience of it, right, the
Right.
interactions between the characters, the actions that the group is taking as a whole, the relationships and the reactions that are arising out of their situations, then the play would be really rich and interesting.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So that's a whole different scenario. And like we played a game, and once that was not, it didn't have anything to do with D&D, but it involved playing a bunch of different archetypes from cyberpunk and various type things where they almost didn't fit because they all felt like main characters. And without naming any games, and it can feel a lot more natural to play in character when there's a little bit more of a social hierarchy.
Yeah.
So that feels a lot different than out of character. And once again, I've played in games where we didn't elect somebody calling, but certainly somebody was making a lot of decisions and it wasn't character. So
Right, the
yeah, it feels a
natural
lot different.
inclinations, right? Um, there are those of us in a group that might be tactically minded, and those of us in the group who might be socially minded, and those of us who don't have a lot of patience. And so it's like, you know, come on, come
Right.
on, come on. And so all these different impulses among the players that are going to manifest.
Right.
And
And it was super interesting uh, in the Molde example that at one point a different player becomes caller because they have a skill that the other player doesn't have.
right, because in those early descriptions, they've got the caller's character must be in the first or second rank where
Right.
they can see. So
Right.
there's a definite inclination or a definite inspiration or guidance that this interaction is supposed to be role played between the characters as Mulvey and company were envisioning it.
Right.
which I think definitely had an impact on my crew growing up because we read that, that's
Right. Exactly. And so that makes, it doesn't just have to be that skill or that you speak Hobgoblin, but the idea that this character is more, it's more in their element at that moment. And so it makes much more sense that now they're going to make the decisions, you
right.
know.
Yeah.
So, experience like that definitely, I think having the benefits of hindsight changed my perception of the function of the caller, but very often we just didn't declare one. But now, okay, now Johnny's in charge of this little moment because none of us know what the heck we're doing. you know,
Yeah. We can gain more insight into how it could be used in a way that we enjoy.
right?
And we can also take careful warnings of how it might go if we allow it to be used in a way that we will not enjoy.
Yeah.
You know.
I had another experience recently playing with some friends where we played a very classic dungeon delve, uh, dungeon crawl. And it was a lot of fun, but I remember going away from the experience saying, I wish we had decided to have a caller.
Right. So you, who is very anti-caller, was like,
I
man,
know
this would have been better if there'd been a
it's
caller.
so much better with a caller, and it was just that it's not that anybody was doing anything wrong, but we didn't clearly have a standard operating procedure. We hadn't played, some of the players had played together a lot before, but it's very much a West Marches style game. So whoever can show up shows up that day, and there was a lot of interest in various things. We could look over here. Maybe we could look through this door or examine this particular doohickey or whatever. Or maybe that sound is important to look at or whatever. And I wish we had just picked one member um, to just say, okay, they're going to make the final decision. And if somebody says, you know what, I'm not doing that. I'm not looking. I'm not going to take the guard over here. That we can discuss it, but to move things along and make it a little faster and smoother, as many of the justifications for having a caller alluded to. So in that particular game with that particular intention, like, man, I really wish we had a caller. Because I noticed it going a little slower, flagging, and I wouldn't call it exactly faffing about, but there was some lack of consensus or lack of focus sometimes.
Sure. And sometimes imagination can play a role in that. So again, like making an argument for the in-character play.
Right, exactly.
Toward the end of high school, friends of mine and I would go out to this old fort, right, a Parks Canada fortress. And so we would
Right.
actually be sitting underground in stone rooms, right?
Oh, you're one of those people. Okay, right on.
So it was cold.
Yeah.
Even on a hot summer day, it was kind of cold and a little bit
Yep.
damp, and the idea of just standing around in the room to decide, right?
Yeah.
What are we gonna do? I don't know. It's like I'm hesitant about taking that left fork this time. I think we're gonna get. It's like I think these guys would be moving as quickly as possible, at least
We
to
got to
just
keep
keep
moving.
warm.
So
We've got to
we
keep
don't
moving.
die.
Yes, we didn't play in the fort by choice. That's where we went to hide that we were playing Dungeons and Dragons.
I thought you were there for the mood and ambiance.
No, because there was also this earthy smell that I can definitely live without.
Yeah, exactly.
but but I think
Did you
that
feel like you
that
were right
kind
there
of
in the
stuff.
situation?
I
Did
did
you feel
feel
like you
like
were
I was
really
right
there?
there.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
Yeah,
but anyhow, go ahead.
it was a very immersive experience. Um, so that kind of thing can inform us. And anytime you've been a part of a committee,
Oh God.
a committee without someone who can say, okay, this part of the discussion is over now. Moving on to, item 4, subsection
Yeah.
C.
Yeah, we did talk about it, and I'm a big fan of things like Robert's Rules of Order and the right thing, and like we both had experiences being members of some kind of committee, where some people are very good at leading and some people are not very good at being when you're chairperson of something like that, you have to be a fairly neutral and very effective facilitator of the decision making process. Some people are good at that, some people are not good at that. Some people will just want to hear themselves talk all day long. God. And some people just don't understand what you're talking about. So yeah, committee
Right. So that's
do it.
the flip
Yeah.
side, right? Is
Yeah.
that the caller, or the game master in lieu of caller, can't be all things to all people. I mean, you have
Right.
to meet them halfway, like to give them a coherent statement of action. I'm going to go over to, you know, to the big lever on the wall and wait for the signal to pull it. You know,
Right.
how are
Exactly.
you
So that,
walking over
yeah.
to the wall?
Yeah.
I'm going to stick
And there
close to the
was,
left wall.
it wasn't feasible due to like age and due to the fact that we were playing online and all that kind of stuff. But when I ran games for kids at the libraries, I really wish we had a caller because, you know, um, it was a little bit like wrangling cats sometimes, and there wasn't a lot
Sure.
of unity of purpose, and so there was a lot of having to manage, very disparate actions. And the group is kind of, you split the party and they're all in the same room. It's not that they're split; they're just all doing something completely different and unrelated. It's like, oh, kill me now.
I think someone left a comment on your caller video to the effect of the social skills
Right.
that Dungeons and Dragons are supposed to produce, right? The caller is one of the ways to develop that skill. I thought that was a very important comment
Yeah, that was
to
that was
prepare
that
you
was really
for.
cool. There were
All
a
right.
ton of like excellent comments on the video and in the Facebook groups. I mean, some of them were just reiterating what people had said on Dragon's Foot, but some of them were just like really, really
Mm.
different and insightful, and a lot of experiences. Some of them were just plain old theory, but a lot of them were experiences. This is my experience I had with the call. This is my positive experience, my negative experience. So it's a whole real treasure trove of that sort of stuff. So hopefully people will leave comments on this video too.
Well, not only just for our enjoyment and elucidation, but currently the internet is returning to a very siloed and separate form.
Right.
We have different main social media platforms where people are gathering, and all the discords are definitely isolated, and so people are sharing links to things, and they're commenting in these small communities where pearls of wisdom can be lost to the larger community. So
Yeah, that's the
you know
downside of the Facebook groups is you can't like if you're not a member, you can't see them. So I have to
right, so you can search all you like, but the
you'll
answer,
never find it.
which could be in 100 different Discord servers, spelled out really neatly for you, won't ever pop up. So if you have thoughts about the caller, if you have experiences, positive, neutral, or negative about the caller, any of the versions of the caller, um, please do share them below for people's elucidation and experience, because it's an interesting tool. Maybe not an elegant tool for a more civilized age, but certainly an interesting thing to have in your toolkit when you want the opportunity of having this large scale experience, or where you want to be able to more easily onboard you know new members to the group and to the hobby. Um, it can be a really useful thing.
Yeah, I mean that was one thing that I thought of a long time ago, 5.5 years ago, when we started having this discussion was the idea like, man, what if somebody had introduced this idea today? Or, using this in some other games, how applicable would it be? And it seems like, I mean, yes, it has a certain it fits in a certain way to the dungeon crawl experience and the classic Dungeons and Dragons experience. But that's not the only place that it would fit or be helpful or with the right circumstances work.
Well,
You
in
know,
our Alien campaign last year or 2 years
right,
ago, had we been playing with a larger group of Marines, it would have
right,
been really appropriate and would have been really interesting. If we split the party kind of thing, if we split the squad of Marines into two different groups, and then you know radio communication back and forth. A lot of this could be used to really heighten role play and create more reasons or interesting justification for a growing sense of panic or isolation or the like.
yeah,
So,
oh, absolutely, that's a
yeah.
good idea. We'll have to use that sometime.
Yeah,
And then I mean, it's something like that. You've got a built-in, whether you've got rank. Of course, as a caller,
mm,
as a sarge. You know,
exactly. All right then. Well, have we accomplished our goals?
I think we have. I think we have. So which one of us is the caller in this video? Do we know?
Leave a comment below. Which one of us was a caller in this
Exactly.
vast party? All right. Thanks for joining me for this, in a sense, reaction to your caller video and the culmination of 5 years of, we really should make that video about the caller.
Yeah, we really should.
And for those of you who stayed with us and watched, thanks very much for doing so. Please do leave comments about your experience with the caller. And until the next video, take care.